research interests are in the developing ethics of cybersecurity. And we also have Shawn, who is a senior program manager in a wide variety of business applications at NVIDIA. She is particularly experienced in incident response, software security, privacy, compliance, and release management. Specialities include incident response, security program management, privacy program management, software compliance, and payments compliance. So they're both, oh, I can see them now, hello. So they're both going to be talking about ethics first, considering ethics for incident response and security teams. So we can give them a very, very warm welcome all the way from, well, I assume one of them's from Netherlands. I have no idea where the other one is, but thank you for coming to us very virtually. Can we give them a warm round of applause?
Excellent. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be. My name is Shawn. I am beaming into you live from Seattle, Washington, so right before my bedtime. So today we're going to be talking a little bit about ethics for security teams. We're kind of going to go over and give you a little insight into how we came up with this and why. Go over the pillars, the duties that we've come up with, and then some of the challenges that we see facing security teams and how a code of ethics like this we believe can help. As we go through this, if you have questions, let us know, and we'll be happy to address anything that you have. And with that, if you can skip to the first slide, please. Excellent. So the horrible part about all this is I would much rather be in Australia with you guys and hanging out. It looks like y'all are going to have a great dinner tonight, and I'm really missing out. The other fun part is you're missing the fact that I'm about 2 feet shorter than Jeroen. So we're quite the pair on stage. We are co-chairs of the Ethics SIG, that's a special interest group at the Forum of Incident Response and Security Teams. Both of us have been participating there for quite a bit, and I am currently a board member of FIRST, and I'll let you talk a little bit.
Yeah, so good morning indeed. It's very early in the Netherlands, and I'm joining you virtually. Small correction to my introduction. I used to be at the University of Amsterdam and University of Delft. I'm now with the University of Twente. But other than that, we're all good. I saw some discussions on Slack about Wi-Fi passwords and network performance. I long for those days that I could experience that again. But today we're here to talk about ethics first. Let's see the introduction. We started with a birds of a feather session in 2016. There was just a very small group of mostly senior people who were starting to realize that cybersecurity was growing, and it was growing at a very fast rate. The first conference was growing a lot. There were over 1,000 participants, or close to that at least. And we were starting to realize that the informal part of cybersecurity and incident response was no longer working, and we needed to make the implicit explicit. So we felt that we needed to develop a code of ethics, and we started with a small group of people, and now we have a dozen of duties. Shawn joined in along the way, and I'm very happy that she joined. And many other people have joined, so that we've gotten a very international input on all of these duties. One thing I have to say, we're still techies at heart, so we use in our introduction, we refer to the IETF and the RFCs, and the idea of all of these duties is that they're recommended, as we state in RFCs. So you really should be doing these, and you should be taking this with. If you don't do this, you have to have a valid reason for not doing it. You have to be able to explain it. And that's a little bit of how we look at these duties, and of course we realize that they conflict, and we'll get to that at the end. With that, so the basis of the whole code of ethics is the next one, the trustworthiness. The whole basis of incident response and working together is that we have to have a level of trust. And Casey just referred to the trust levels. This is also a function of FIRST, to create that network, to create those relationships, and to set a bar of what it is that we expect from one another. And all of these duties that we've described, they build on top of that, and they try to create that trustworthiness, that community sense, and that predictability in how you behave and what we can expect from each other. One of those is, of course, the duty of coordinated vulnerability disclosure. This is something that we have a lot of experience with in the Netherlands, because we're one of the few countries that actually has a legal framework for this. But this tradition of vulnerability disclosure is, of course, much older than that, and it's been around in the incident response and cybersecurity community for a very long time, and everybody appreciates the value of this. And so this is why we've taken this up as a duty for incident responders to coordinate vulnerability disclosures, to coordinate your actions so that we don't collide into each other, and we should minimize harm, and we should be very clear on the timelines and the release of information to minimize the risk and impact to the users and to our constituency. And with that, I'll hand it over to Shawn.
Awesome, thank you. So on to the next slide, where we start talking about confidentiality. This really ties into quite a bit with what we were talking about with the CDD earlier. You know, we have to be able to respect the request for confidentiality. You know, if you get somebody who's sending something into you, you want to make sure that you can let them know you're going to keep it confidential. You let them know when you will be able to publish the information and set their expectations. Now, again, there's always some gray areas, and there are going to be some times where you can't respect. One of the things we suggest is trying to be transparent when that comes up. So if you are going to have to break embargo for whatever reason, if you're going to, you know, have to alert another vendor, whatever it is, our recommendation would be to try and be as transparent as you possibly can with the person or group that's coming in and giving you this information, preferably up front.
If I can
and
chime
not
in,
after the fact.
Yeah, so this is also an area where the background of me and Shawn are very different, because I'm in a governmental organization, and there's just rules and laws that I have to live up to, and I know about them, so I can be transparent about them, and I can warn you about them. And that situation is slightly different for Shawn, for example.
This is true. Companies tend to run a little differently, but you know, companies fall under different jurisdictions as well. We'll get a little more into that as we go forward, but it's trying to be upfront with your policies. For example, if you go out to most of the vendors that we work with, they will state that they follow coordinated vulnerability disclosure. They set your expectations on how they will follow embargo and things of that nature. And it's just a good practice to have that public information out there. So let's go ahead and go on to the next slide, and then we'll talk a little bit about acknowledging. So I have seen this one bite teams before. It sounds so easy and so basic. Somebody submits information to you and you acknowledge you've received it. Sounds very easy. It's amazing how often it doesn't happen. Sometimes it's because its teams maybe don't have their incident response team set up, or it's decentralized, or the person who's receiving the information doesn't know what to do with it. Things can happen for different reasons. Occasionally you'll just have something where, you know, we all get busy and your email box is full and you didn't quite get to that day's email attendance that you should have. Whatever it is, again, we do highly recommend having timely responses. Even if it's, hey, we've received your email, thanks for writing in. My preference is it not be a can stand, but if that's what works, for you, that's what works. At least I will know my email, my communication has gotten through to you. Confirm what you're going to do, and then set expectations. Am I not going to hear from you for another month because it's busy and you're in lockdown for something? Or can I expect to hear back from you within the next 2 weeks? By setting that expectation with me, it will let me know, when do I need to ping you if I'm not hearing back from you? I've had occurrences in the past with other teams where somebody got let the communication go stale, and the researcher got very upset and started tweeting that they were going to zero-day that company because they couldn't get a response. That's certainly that response quickly, but definitely not a positive one on either side. So by acknowledging and setting expectations, it helps to maintain those relationships and hopefully maintain them in a positive manner. And now go on to the next slide.
Yeah, and to add to the previous one, it doesn't matter if you can't live up to the expectation, but at least be transparent about it, and just let people know that you're aware that you promised something, you're not going to make it, and then just tell people, and it makes a whole lot of difference, and it just builds upon the trust level that we need to build up and maintain. So the next duty is the duty of authorization. And I mentioned before, we all have very different teams. We have different constituencies. We have different stakes that we represent. And we have to be aware of how our actions impact our constituents, our users, and we have to ensure that we don't cause them additional harm while we're doing things for them or to them. Sometimes we need to do forensics investigations within a network or somewhere or other, and you have to make sure that you have authorization before you enter there, and make sure that you're only doing what you're supposed to be doing. This also slides in with the next duty. That's the duty to inform. Whenever you're doing something on behalf of your constituents or something that may impact your constituents or your user, you have to inform them. And you should also be aware that incident responders and security teams usually get advance notice of developments. We have part of our job is basically having a good information position on what is happening in the cybersecurity world, and not all of our users and constituents have this, and it's our duty to keep them informed about the current threats and risks. And of course, we have to do this with appropriate efforts, considering confidentiality, privacy laws, regulations, and any other obligations that we have towards others, countries, or partners. Yeah, I think that's.
Awesome.
Yeah, you just have to be. We have to keep them informed in a way that they can understand also.
That's a good point. Respect for human rights. As incident responders, we have access to a lot of information, a lot of things that can impact others, whether it's sharing information, possible bias in our actions, or even an infringement of property rights in some places. And we need to realize we've got access to personal, sensitive, confidential information. We're handling all these different kinds of incidents. We normally have some guidelines into how we handle that, but keeping in mind that there's a human being potentially on the other end of this investigation is very important, and that we have to respect those rights. This was kind of a very interesting one for us to discuss because I think there's some different regional perspectives on this. I know for some of our members who are over in Europe, where there's a lot more around human rights and governments stating as much versus where I am in the States, where it's not quite as heavily influenced, if you will. It had to be some very interesting discussions on what that means from a cybersecurity perspective. We try to leave it fairly general because, again, it's going to vary kind of from organization to organization, place to place. But the main part we wanted to reiterate is that during an incident, we shouldn't be acting in a biased manner. And we should be trying to do the least amount of harm during an incident. Because, sometimes you have to go in and, as Jeroen was saying, you're investigating and tearing through things and trying to find what's happening. But just to be aware of where that could cross lines. And for the purposes of this principle, we took the notion of property, just to clarify, from the UN Declaration of Human Rights, Article 17, just so that includes intangible things like intellectual property, as well as other ideas and concepts in general, regardless of whether they're legally protected or not. So that was an interesting route that we talked about a lot before we came up with this conclusion. And the next slide, please. Team health. This is actually one of my personal favorites because I've worked on some not so healthy teams. Shall I put it that way? Can we say toxic? Mm-hmm. We want to make sure we're taking care of our teams. We have stressful jobs. Especially if you're an incident responder, it's like what day do you actually get to go in the office and do the things that you have written on your to-do list? Not very often, potentially. So how do you keep your team physically and emotionally healthy? How do you keep them safe? And how do you make sure that you're reducing their stress? The physical and emotional health, we have jobs we have to do. We tell our constituents that we are going to handle incidents, that we're going to, release bulletins, whatever your role is. But to be able to have people who are functioning, you need to make sure that they're relatively healthy. We also want to make sure that normal operations aren't always emergencies, and so that people can be supported during that time, and so you have that normal day, and you're able to rest up and able to have that normal day. So when the incidents, the bad ones, do happen, they seem to be more frequently in the last few months, you're able to step up, you're able to actually do all the things you need to do to take care of the incident. It's a good investment because, one, if you don't, people make mistakes when they're tired or under stress. And number two, if you keep folks under stress constantly, you have a high likelihood of having turnover. And there's all that wonderful experience walking out the door. I've been on teams where if you had survived a year and a half, you would consider one of the old gray dogs. I don't know about you, but nowadays a year and a half turnover would drive me insane and would be very unproductive for the team. So to me, this and the trustworthiness are, I think, two of the most important ones in my mind, just to get the overall incident team in a better position to do their roles. And can we go to the next slide, please?
Yeah. So one of the things we have to realize is we can't be superheroes all of the time, and we have to cater to the team's abilities. We also have to be aware that cybersecurity is changing a lot, and it's happening very rapidly. But we have a responsibility to our constituency, to our jobs, and to the community to keep up and to keep updated. So you also have to be aware that there's a duty to ability and to maintain that ability, so that you provide opportunity for study. And you plan to everybody's strength and diversity. Each person brings a unique perspective, and you should be open to that. And they should have time and resources to be able to study and get to grips with the most advanced technological and scientific knowledge within their areas of responsibility. And there's a lot happening, and it's very valuable to keep up with that, to be able to work with the new insights. And it's not just important; it's also very inspiring. And it helps you to keep your job interesting, and it helps prevent that turnover. And if we go to the next one, there's a responsible collection. I mentioned before that sometimes you have to do forensics. You're going in, you're logging traffic, you're logging emails, you're logging packets, whatever. I mentioned before, you should be aware of what your authorization is, how far you can go with actually capturing all of this. And of course, when you start an investigation, you have no idea what is going on, and you're just trying to capture everything. But once you start figuring out during your investigation what is going on, then you can narrow the scope, and you should narrow what you collect. You shouldn't be casting the net out wide all of the time. You should be very focused on what it is that you're collecting in order to support your investigation. And of course, you may make it may be necessary to make data available to other teams, but be aware that it may be necessary to redact some of that information, that personal information, that you don't release more than you have to. You should be outweighing the risk against the benefits. We often have to work with law enforcement, and they have a different stake in these kind of investigations than you do. And sometimes those align, and sometimes those go against each other. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. You just need to be aware of them, and you need to be aware of what that might impact, how that might impact others that you're working with. And one of the things that is very often forgotten is destroying data in accordance with data retention policies. And of course, I'm in the EU. There's lots of discussions on the GDPR. One of the things that's very often forgotten still, even in the EU, is safely destroying data and having data retention policies and policies and measures in place that you actually provably destroy data. One of the things that's happening now is I see that we're in a Zoom call that has only 10 minutes left. And I think our session is longer. But yeah, we'll see how that goes. Up next is the jurisdictional boundaries for you, Jeroen.
Okay. So obviously when we're doing incidents, especially when they are incidents that span outside of our local area, we're going to have to be very cognizant of jurisdictional boundaries. This can be, country to country. This can be organization to organization, region to region, state, county, whatever the breakdown is where you are. The fun part is sometimes those laws are not always congruent and can kind of go against each other. And so it's always good to try and figure out kind of what those boundaries need to be beforehand if you can. Working with your lawyers to identify where there may be risks is very important. Keeping in mind, because when you're in the middle of an incident, trying to go and get legal questions answered can be difficult and time consuming, and you might not have a lot of time on your hands as you're fighting this. Laws and regulations and other legal issues like those related to privacy protection, data breach notifications, and they're going to potentially differ from place to place. I know I get pulled into discussions with vendors all the time about what are the incident response requirements for notification and breaches, and it can vary from region to region, and trying to get one set across all of our active vendors is very difficult. You've got issues between different political regions, even here in the States, where we have some states that are much more, shall I say, litigious than others and have a lot more rules and regulations than others. And so being aware of those is very important, especially when you're dealing information and collaborating or handing off information or sharing vulnerability information. Just want to be aware of the key issues that affect in each jurisdiction, including but not limited to obviously privacy and data breach. Cybersecurity and privacy laws and regulations evolve and continue to change. And I've been seeing things change over the last couple of years very quickly. And so it's very important to stay on top of those and be aware, especially if it's areas that you are doing a lot of interactions with. So, you know, with my company where we currently are, there's a lot of things we do, obviously, with folks in the Asia Pacific region. So being kind of aware and cognizant of that has been very important for us. And we'll go on to the next slide, please. Evidence-based reasoning. This is pretty basic. Use the facts, provide evidence and scope that's transparent. If it's not possible for some reason, be that corporate, legal, government, whatever it is, try to at least let folks know why you can't share the information. You know, saying, hey, it's under embargo, or, you know, we're legally obliged to do something else. Sharing what you can, being as transparent as you can, and with the understanding that there are limits depending on what organization you're coming from. Try to refrain from starting rumors. It's always good that that we share our thoughts on things. We all come with different experiences, and sharing kinds of things we've seen in the past are great. But when you're in the middle of the incident, you want to deal with the facts and not something that is going to prove to be false and lead you down a rabbit hole you don't need to be going down. And transparent evidence and reasoning processes are also important even in cases of automated sharing. During the automation process, sharing large amounts of data, you want to make sure there's a description of the data mining process and make sure that's communicated at an intelligible level of detail. So if somebody's looking at it from the other end, they can understand what it is they're getting, where it's coming from. And with that, so we've talked about all these things. We've talked about how things can be incongruent and kind of fight each other. And so now Jeroen's going to walk us through a little bit on dealing with dilemmas.
Yeah. And I mentioned before, we have all of these duties. We have a dozen of duties, and they may conflict with each other, and you're ending up with dilemmas. And so you end up in a situation where it's hard to see your way out of it. And I used Ernie here with his rubber ducky, and this is a principle that's also that works with debugging, is rubber ducky debugging. And the same thing is with dilemmas. You talk to somebody, a colleague, preferably somebody who is aware of these duties, and by talking out, having the discussion, you very often you see what is going on, what the different values are, how they affect stakeholders, etc. And then with that, you can work your way out of a dilemma, and it may not always be to your liking, and if necessary, you could make a recommendation that's different than what you're doing. You note that's how you see this situation, and then and we have to go on, because very often our work is time sensitive, but still take some time to deal with these dilemmas and reflect on what it is that you're doing, and that's I believe that's very valuable in maintaining that high level of trust that we have, to both within our community, but also from society to us.
One of the other recommendations that we have too, when I'm discussing this, is when you have a dilemma, is potentially, depending, again, talk to your legal advice, documenting the kind of your options and why you took the route you did.
Yeah.
Some
yes.
kind of.
Yeah, and the same thing with brainstorming that helps a lot is either change the way that you're documenting it. So either speaking or writing down. It often helps you gain different perspectives. but still noting down what your options are and why you chose what you do, it helps. So we have a couple of case studies that we can go through. One of them is a personal one that I experienced. We had a researcher reach out to us, and they found vulnerabilities in SSDs. So secure, what is it? So the hard drives, portable hard drives, and there's encryption in there. He took a closer look at the encryptions of those hard drives, and the implementation was lacking. And it turned out to be a industry-wide problem. And then we started reaching out. So first of all, of course, we have the duty of vulnerability disclosure. So we took this up. This was an academic researcher. It's very hard for them to reach out to all of the different vendors to even figure out who the vendors are and the contact information. So we took it upon us to coordinate this issue. We reached out to vendors, and then we started to realize that it was actually the vendors were not allowed to talk to each other due to market protections. And this created a very difficult situation for us because we needed to talk to them, and we needed to relay information between them, but then without explicitly identifying the other vendors that were affected. And that created a very interesting situation where we had multiple conversations, and at some point, of course, they realized who the other vendors were. But still, we couldn't explicitly state that, and we had to coordinate all this with different conversations, be transparent to each of them. There was some legal negotiations, which also was very difficult because of the very different jurisdictions, because it was a Dutch academic researcher, vendors in Korea and other countries. And so this took a long time, and there were very many different dilemmas that kept going up, and it took some serious discussions with colleagues in how to keep going with this and doing this in the right way. In the end, we did end up with vulnerability disclosure open. It was coordinated, and I believe things have been fixed. So that's a win, at least. And then the next one, we didn't identify this within our case studies. We're currently working on a set of case studies, but while discussing this and seeing developments over the last few months, I just felt we couldn't ignore this one. And of course, this picture is from the WannaCry ransomware that I had the pleasure of dealing with in the Netherlands. But other than, I mean, we're seeing a lot of different threats of ransomware to many different organizations, and it's just rife with dilemmas that keep coming up because there are so many different actors involved. There's different jurisdictions. There's different impacts of user data, confidential data that may be leaked out or not, impact to privacy laws, impact to intellectual property, and you want to go after the people who the perpetrators, but of course that's not what incident responders do. So you have to work with law enforcement, but then you have to be aware of what it is that you can and cannot exchange with law enforcement. In the case of WannaCry, there was a nation-state actor behind this. You may have to work with intelligence agencies. That opens up another can of worms, that kind of dilemmas that come up. So I can imagine that this is just these kind of things will come up in the daily operations of many teams, and yeah, it's just we just want to say that we explicitly identify that this is hard and that there's no solution, easy solution.
And I think the other point to mention here too, as well, is, we're sitting here and giving you external examples, which is a lot of what the case studies that we're working on are around. But some of these are going to be internal to your own organizations. I had an incident where a researcher reached out to me and said, "Hey, I found all of this open data out on the internet, da 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 da." I said, "Wait, stop, tell me no more." He had broken the terms of service. Now, at my older company, I knew we would be fine. Send us the information. We work through the incident. That's fine. At this new company, I wasn't sure. They were a little newer, a little bit different culture, and so I had to stop before I was given anything that could be potentially damaging, and go to the lawyers and kind of educate them on what CBD was, educate them on kind of certain expectations, and so make sure they were comfortable with how this was going to go. And once I had that legal buy-in that no, we would not as a company go after this person or do anything of that nature, I could then go back to them and say, "We're good to go, please allow me to have that information." But I wanted to be transparent with that researcher to let them know, hey, hold off, and then work in the jurisdiction side, the legal side of things to make sure. And it was an internal thing that I had to deal with. So all sorts of cases come up.
That's what we meant with the duty of confidentiality and being transparent about what it is that you can keep confidential and what you can't.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Almost last slide, please.
Yeah.
So what's next? So we've been working on this for about 2 years. We have these lovely set of duties, which are now translated into Arabic, Chinese, French, Russian, and Spanish. We're now looking for organizations and companies to endorse the code. Not saying that you're going to say we're going to follow it step by step, but that you think this is a good idea. We're looking for help into completing our cases for the duties. So again, it's about the same 12 of us have been looking at this a while, and we could certainly use some fresh perspectives, some fresh experiences. The nice thing to note is you do not need to be a member of FIRST to come and join our SIG, our special interest group. You can come and we have meetings that are both regional, somewhat regional friendly, from this United States perspective, an early morning on a late afternoon one, so we're trying and get somewhat friendly for all the regions. We're also looking to create training and content. The big thing at FIRST is we want to help bring security up for everyone. So that's creating standards, that's creating education and training and documents that are usually free of use for anyone, whether you're a member or not. And so we want to create some training around these codes to help people when they're creating their own or taking ours and munging it a little bit, the things they want to think about. One little bit of thing about us is that this started off as a project to create a code of ethics for FIRST itself. That was kind of our scope when we started. But as we took it to the board and they looked at it and went, wow, this was a lot of work, this was a great idea. And they saw benefit into sharing this more broadly for other teams to look at and potentially create their own. So very excited with the amount of work we still have left to do. Any last thoughts? And
I should note also that we worked with lawyers to look at the text, and it's been phrased in such a way that it doesn't present requirements. It's not how do you say this? It's voluntary, and it's just suggestions on how to deal with dilemmas and incidents, etc. It doesn't require you to do anything.
So if you're interested, our emails are here, Shawn at FIRST and Jeroen Vanderham at ncsc.nl. We would love to hear from you. And with that, I believe we're down to our last slide and to see if anyone has any questions.
Yeah.
Cool. Can I have a round of applause real quickly? Oh.
I think I heard 3 claps. Thank you.
So there were a few questions, or a couple questions, but we are very quickly running out of time, so we need to swap over laptops. So if we could get Mark and Alex to come up the stage, maybe we can do it simultaneously so we can answer the questions. Is that all right?
Sure.
Okay.
Fantastic. So the first question is to Jeroen. You are doing some impressive work and important work. In your experience, does the Dutch government apply principles set by the NCSC well enough, or does Mark Rutte not take this seriously?
So Mark Rutte is our Prime Minister. He there are different ministers. There are different stakes involved in government. So I work for the Minister of Justice and Security, and as the name implies, he has different constituencies. So the Dutch police is also reporting to that minister, the law enforcement, etc. So there are different stakes involved. We do support the encryption, and we're very vocal about that. And different parts of our government support the idea of encryption, and we try to be very open about that. Yeah, and I do my best to be an advocate for that. Thanks.
Fantastic, thank you. And we do have maybe time for one more question really quickly. So we often talk about designing our processes with ethical principles in mind. What should we do when we find our current processes were very unethical already? How should we respond to that?
Well, that's a good question. I think the first thing to do is kind of do a gap analysis of where you're seeing things fall down. Where are the areas that need to be addressed, and then, work together to find what the right direction is to shore those up. You can always change your process and policies to better align. It's always better to say, yeah, we used to do it like this in the past, but we've learned better, and now we're doing it like this in the future. Certainly, talk with your constituents internally and get their input as well. Jeroen, do you have any other thoughts?
Yeah, and so this has been one of the goals also of Ethics First to change that and to create a public resource for others to be able to point at explicitly and saying, this is how we do things in incident response and security. And now we have this on Ethics First. It's supported by FIRST.org and many other organizations, and you can use that to advocate for a different approach.
Cool, thank you so much for that. And can I have a massive round of applause, because we've got Jeroen, who's coming from Netherlands, probably got up at 5 in the morning this morning.
Yes,
we got
indeed.
Shawn on the other side of the world, which is quite late over there as well. So time zones are very difficult in COVID world. So thank you both so much.
Thank you for having us. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you.
All righty, straight into the next.